Jeff, thank you for being with us today here at Torocon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, George.
Cool. Let's start right from the beginning in case somebody doesn't know who you are.
Sure.
Let me just tell us a bit about of your story.
Sure. Yeah. I am a writer. For the past 10 years, I've taught online courses for writers. I've written 5 books. A couple of those have become international bestsellers. I write about creativity and business and sort of the intersection of making things and sort of personal discovery. So it's a mix of like self-help and creativity. I've been a creative person in one form or another my whole life. When I was a teenager, my dad taught me how to play guitar. I always dreamed of being in a rock band. I sort of got to realize that dream after college. I graduated and toured with the band for about a year. And then I moved to Nashville and started working in the nonprofit space where I learned about online marketing. And I did that for about 7 years. And I really got into blogging while I was working for a nonprofit organization. And I started blogging for myself, and I built an online audience and eventually became a published author. People asked me how I did what I did. So I started teaching people how to become full-time writers. And uh, a couple of years ago, I started ghostwriting and shut down the education side of the writing business and focus now on writing and editing books for other people. And I run a creative agency where we work with thought leaders to turn their big ideas into best-selling books.
Wow, great journey. The process was you started with blogging, and then you wrote your books, and you became an author. Is that the way it goes?
Yeah, I started blogging, learned how to tell stories in a way that engaged an online audience. And yeah, and then from there, it turned into writing books and teaching courses and doing live events and speaking and all of those things.
Cool. What is the process for someone to become a writer? Do you think it's something you have in you and you just let it out, or is it a way for me, for example, to become a writer? Is it something that can be taught, and so I become one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both. It's hard to want to be something that you don't have inside you. I'm sure I could learn how to be a plumber, but if there's uh, nothing intrinsic in me that is interested in fixing a pipe or something, I think it's gonna be hard to find the motivation to be a plumber or a writer. So I would never tell somebody to just try to be a writer if they're not interested in it. But for many years, I struggled with the idea that I even was a writer. And I remember reading like I think somebody tweeted at Anne Lamott, who's an author, and they said, how do I become a writer? And she said, if you write, you are a writer. Now go get better. And there's some truth to that. Being a writer is not a vocation that you've got to go to school for. You don't get a degree in it per se. You don't get a certificate that says professional writer. Some of the greatest authors in history were not English majors. And they weren't even necessarily that good at grammar. So to be a writer, I think is, in a sense, a calling. It's a thing that chooses you. It's not something that I would necessarily choose just as like a good job. It's something that I felt was a calling, a vocation, and at the same time, it's a skill, right? So like anything, it requires lots of practice and time. But if somebody wants to be a writer, they feel that calling on their lives, or they want to. Most of the people that I've worked with over the years, writing was a part of what they did. It wasn't all of what they did.
Mhm.
And I think that good writing is always in demand. If you're a good writer, this is what my first boss told me. He says, if you're a good writer, you should never be without a job, because so many jobs involve really good writing. And if you can learn how to be a good writer, you can sell things, you can make money, you can persuade people, you can do a lot of things with the skill of writing. And so I've not always been a professional writer. I've done a lot of different things, worked in a bunch of different businesses and nonprofit organizations, and being able to be a good writer and a good communicator always helped. It gave me an edge. It allowed me to get ahead when other people, didn't have that same skill. So I'm grateful for it, and I use it in a lot of different capacities.
Sure. You mentioned before that while you were working at the nonprofit sector, you learned about marketing, and I have a feeling that that changed the trajectory of uh, what you did in terms of it helped you make writing a profession and make a
Yep.
living out of it. Is that how
Yep.
it went off?
Yeah. So I've been writing my whole life. I never would have called myself a writer. And I went to college. I had a double major in Spanish and religion, and then I
Spanish
graduated.
and religion.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's right.
That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
interesting.
Uh-huh. 2 degrees. And then I graduated college and I toured with a band. So, I was just like trying stuff. I was just chasing things that I was interested in. And while I was touring with the band, I would write a weekly blog post about what we were doing. And all of our friends and family members would read those blog posts and be like, wow, this is so interesting. And so when I moved to Nashville, I was looking for a job, sleeping on a friend's couch, and I got a job working part-time in a call center here in Nashville, and then I started applying for their jobs. I wanted to do something, I didn't know what, and I started working at this nonprofit. And when they hired me part time. And the guy who hired me, he said, "Oh, you're a writer. We need more writers." And I was like, "I am," And what he saw on my resume was that when I was in college, I was a writing tutor. I'd always been pretty good at writing, and so it was a way for me to make some money. And he said, "Oh, you're a writer." And so he hired me as a copywriter, and I didn't know anything about marketing. I thought marketing was evil. I was, this artist, and um, he said, read Seth Godin's blog, and that's a pretty good education in online marketing. And so I read everything that Seth wrote, and I learned from Seth that good marketing is about making worthy ideas spread. Marketing is the art of helping ideas spread, and it's easier to spread a good idea, or rather an interesting one, than it is to spread a boring one or a bad idea. And so my job was working with a bunch of international missionaries who were doing international relief and development work all over the world. And part of my job was to tell their stories. And so I was taking this skill of writing and storytelling, and I was running it through the lens of marketing. How do you tell a story or share an idea in a way that gets people's attention? And so, yeah, I eventually became the marketing director there. I built out a marketing team. And this job taught me how to share information in a way that was appealing to other people. And then, of course, I parlayed that into a career as a writer and as an author and as a teacher of other creative professionals.
Nice, nice. And when did the first and how did the first book publishing deal came about?
So I started blogging, and a book publisher contacted me, and they said, "Hey, have you ever thought about publishing a book?" And I was like, "Holy cow, that sounds awesome!" And they saw what
Wow.
I was doing. You asked before, how do you become a professional writer?
Did you
Uh,
have an audience by then? I mean,
yeah,
did you
I
have a
did.
big
I had
people?
probably an email list of 10,000 people. And if you want to make a living as an artist today, you've got to have a skill, and you've got to have a way of uh, putting that skill in front of people in a way where they're going to connect with it. So building an online audience, having your own audience that you have access to and control the access to it, I think is essential. And that's what I built, not really knowing what I was doing, just writing every day, publishing it. People were showing up, reading it. And a publisher said, "Hey, we'd love to publish you." And I got a book advance of $6,000, which was like world changing, life changing money for me at the time. And it was my first book. And once I did that, I knew how to do it, and I could keep doing it after that.
So you are now in your fifth one, right?
I've written 5 books with my name on it, and I've written another probably 5 or 6 books for other people as a ghostwriter and collaborator.
Right. I read a book. I saw a book that you have published that says real artists don't starve.
Yes.
What's the premise of the book? And let's talk about that as
Sure.
well.
Yeah. So I've been making a living, full-time living off of my writing and creative work for the past 10 years. And when I wrote that book, I was, every book is sort of an attempt to answer a question. And this question was, can you really make a living today as an artist, as a creative professional? And my observation is yes, not only can you do that, it's easier than it's ever been to make money off of your art, whatever that means to you. Could be photography, could be, you know, design, could be music, could be writing, could be poetry, could be visual art, whatever. And so the book is, if you're going to be a starving artist today, that is a choice, not a necessary condition of doing creative work. The opportunity to make a living off of creative work is available to so many people in so many different ways. If you can't find a way to make a living off of your work, then you're missing something. You're simply not trying hard enough, or you're believing a very old story, which is what the book is about. The story of the starving artist, the myth of the starving artist. And myths are stories that we use to make sense of our reality. Some myths, no myths are actually true. Some myths um, are true because we believe them, and other myths become true because we act as if they're true. You know, we bring them into existence. And what I found is the people who were starving, they're actual starving artists, believed that you had to starve to be a real artist. And I met plenty of other people and meet them every day, thriving creative professionals who simply reject that idea. They don't believe it. And as a result of what they believe, they found another path to success. So that was the challenge of the book, is there is no reason to starve today if you're an artist. And if you are, you're just missing something. And I wrote the book to help people understand the path to go from starving to successful.
All right. So in the book, will a creator find like practical steps of
Yep.
what to follow and examples, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's hundreds of illustrations throughout history, including many modern day examples. My argument is many of the great artists that you think were broke and starving and suffering were not. They were, at very least, making a living wage. Van Gogh is an example of this. Vincent van Gogh wasn't starving. He was bankrolled by his brother. He made a living wage. And then you've got extreme examples of people like Michelangelo, who was the richest artist of the Renaissance, and not only was an exception to the rule, but created a new rule in the Renaissance. During the Renaissance, many artists after Michelangelo became incredibly wealthy as a result of him breaking that glass ceiling and demonstrating what was actually possible. And then, you know, hundreds of modern day examples as well.
I see. So in your mind is that artists, like it's a fulfilling their own prophecy. They believe that in order to be creative, you need to starve. So it's a condition in order to create something of substance, right?
Yeah, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's exactly right. And the story of the starving artist is not a very old one. It came out in the late 19th century. There was a French writer named Henri Murger who wrote these scenes of the Bohemian life because he couldn't make it as a writer, and so he wrote a book telling all these short stories that eventually became the opera La Boheme, eventually became the musical Rent. It was all inspired by this book that he wrote, which is a series of short stories about struggling, starving artists living in Paris in the late 1800s. And as a result of this story, many people started believing in the whole bohemian ideal. And it's just a blip in the history of artists. It's a little sliver in all of creation, you know, all of humanity, and we live as if it's true. We believe it's true. Like every artist, you know, is going to struggle. And the fact is, what it means to be an artist is means so many different things. You know, I met people who were working at NASA who considered themselves artists. And so to be a creative person and to use your creativity in the world is incredibly valuable. And I argue that this old story that was just kind of a sliver in history of where people believe that artists had to struggle and suffer and starve as a result of their creative genius, and did because they believed that's what they had to do. That's not the whole story. It's not helpful. I suggest that we discard the unhelpful stories and adopt a new one, which is the story of the thriving artist, which anywhere you look, you can see examples of it today. There are people making money on TikTok, you know, like making tiny little videos, and you know, musicians who are now their own record companies, and artists and authors and people who are choosing themselves and finding a way to get their art in front of an audience and make a living off of it. It is not difficult to do these days, and it is certainly it may not be easy, but it is easier than it has ever been.
Mhm. I've heard on another interview. I don't remember where you were hosted, but you talked about artists being stubborn sometimes,
Yes,
and that's something that makes them maybe a star, or not make it in the world.
right.
Can you elaborate a bit on this?
Yes. Yeah, you have to be stubborn about the right things, but stubbornness is a skill. And when you learn how to harness your stubbornness, it becomes very, very powerful. One of the things that I've observed about most creative people is they're really picky about certain things, right? A good writer is picky about the right words. You know, a visual artist is picky about using the right colors. You know, a good photographer is picky about lighting. It is important to be stubborn about the right things, because stubborn leads to excellence. Being stubborn about the right things leads to excellence. Being stubborn about the wrong things leads to despair and failure and all kinds of frustration. And there's a great Jeff Bezos quote that he talked about how he grew Amazon, where he said one of their mantras was, we're stubborn on vision, flexible on details. Stubborn on vision, flexible on details. A good artist is stubborn on their vision of what they want to create with their work and with their life, and they're flexible in terms of how they get there. But when you flip that and you become stubborn on the details, you lose sight of the vision. Like, you can't have vision if you're focused, hyper focused on all of the details. Now, you can focus on like one or two details, but to fixate, we all know people who hyper fixate on one little thing, and they, you know, miss the, you know, the forest for the trees, as it were. And if you want to have a good long life of creating many great things, you've got to get a vision for what you're ultimately wanting to create and stay stubbornly focused on that vision, and then, you know, let the chips fall where they may, meaning you'll
Because
have
there
some
are a lot of
success.
roads leading you there, right?
Yeah, you'll have some successes, you'll have some failures, you'll do some things that are big hits, and then you'll do some things that aren't, and you may take a job over here that doesn't make sense, but all of this is sort of getting you to where you want to go, and your job is to not lose sight of what that vision is, what you're ultimately trying to create with your life and with your work.
Do you consider all creators artists?
Yeah, I know that word creator is a big word today. A creator, in my mind, is just a modern day artist, you know, and an artist is somebody who has a vision for something new that they want to bring into the world, and they do it in hopes of transforming someone or something. You know, art is doing something new that changes other people or other things, hopefully in a positive way. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're making something and sharing it with the world in hopes of transforming it in some small or big way, that's art.
Makes sense. Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So these days, an artist or a creator has to wear a lot of hats, different hats.
Yes.
Uh, what hats do you wear, you know, on a daily basis in order to run your business?
Right. I wear the hat of writer. That's, you know, I've done that my whole life, and so that's the easiest one to wear. I also wear that because I run an agency. My title is creative director. I'm kind of in charge of making all of our work as interesting as possible. I continue to wear the hat of marketer. It's my job to grow the business, make more money, reach new people. I've got about 20 years in online marketing now. I mean, those are kind of the main ones. I guess wear the boss CEO hat as well, business owner. Um, and then there's all the husband, father, friend, all of those personal hats as well. But yeah, I mean, I
Sure.
think of my job like I have too many jobs right now. I'm making things, I'm running things, and I'm sort of overseeing the work of other people, and I'm also out there selling things. But I've always worn these hats. I've always had to make stuff and then get other people to kind of help me make stuff and then get that work in front of new people. And when I'm in a good flow, I'm breaking up those activities in different parts of the day. When I'm not in a good flow, they're all kind of bleeding into each other and it feels like chaos.
Sure. You mentioned the marketeer hat. What does that include in a daily basis? I mean, do you use, of course, you will be using in social media, blogging. What else? How do you leverage marketing in order to bring people to see what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think marketing is just controlled conversations around a particular topic. And so what I mean by that is people are going to talk about the work that you do one way or the other. Marketing is the act of sort of navigating and controlling those conversations in some way. So the main marketing that I do is I just talk to people. It might be a podcast, might be an interview like this. I might call some of our old clients and ask, if they've got any referrals, any recommendations for other people that could work with us. Writing an article, running a newsletter. These are all aspects of marketing. I think it was Austin Kleon who said, talking about the work is the work, meaning marketing is an aspect of what every artist does, whether they realize it or not. Getting people to talk about your work is marketing. And so I'm always thinking, how do I get people to talk about the work that we're doing? Well, we help people write books. And so one of the best ways we can do that is just do better work, write really good books and create a really great client experience for our clients. And then having conversations around that. So most of the marketing that I do is showing up on a podcast because I only need one or two people to hear it go, oh, I'd love to, get some help with my book editing or writing or planning it. And just because of the nature of our work, we don't need a lot of customers in order to, make good money. So it's pretty organic. It's fairly informal. I do a podcast or two interview per week, and that's and then we just stay in touch with our clients and try to find ways to do better work so that people keep talking about it.
Nice. Since you mentioned the economics of what you do, uh, because I understood that you have a team that you support, you have people that working for you. So in terms of the economics, for example, how many clients do you need per year in order to be sustainable, to break even, or to have profits?
About 20. Yeah, 20 is a good number for us. We shoot for about 20 to 30 clients per year. We break projects down into kind of three buckets. We work on books. That's all we do. We have a team of writers and editors. About a third of the projects we do are just book planning projects. You have an idea for a book and you want to just start writing it. We recommend don't start writing it, plan it. Write a book plan. Or if you want to sell your book to a publisher, you're going to need a book proposal. But a book plan, book proposal, same thing basically. A book plan is for yourself. The proposal is for the publisher. So we help people develop plans for their books so they know what they're aiming at. The other piece of it is we write the books or either write them with you or for you. And then there's the editing piece. We have a team of editors that will help authors finish their books. So we will do one of those pieces, two of those pieces, or all three. So we plan, write, and edit books. And yeah, about 20 clients a year is a good living where everybody's getting paid, myself included. We've got some profit, but we're still in startup phase, so we're still figuring things out. I've
Sure.
I've been a ghostwriter for I don't know, 3-4 years, and I've been doing the lion's share of our work. And now I'm trying to bring in other writers and train them and have a team of people, because I do think that writing a book is a team effort. Even when I'm writing a book for myself, I'm working with a team of people. You know, there's a couple of editors, there's somebody who's helping me craft the vision of the book. The main thing that I'm trying to communicate with the work that we do at Fresh Complaint, which is the name of our agency, is books are not created by committees. That's too many people. It's not a committee process, but it is a collaborative process. It does take a team of a handful of individuals who know what they're doing to create a professional level book.
All right. You stuck. You're stuck for some reason. You're okay. You're back. Cool. Okay. So let's say I'm a client.
Yeah.
What it takes for me to start? Do I need just a book idea? Do I need and could it be, for example, if I want to write a fiction book,
Yes.
could you do that for me, or is it just a more practical, biographies and stuff that I can contribute with?
Most of the books that we do are nonfiction. About 80% of them are nonfiction business and self-help books. The other 20% are memoir or something different. We are working on a business fable right now, so it's technically a novel. But you wouldn't hire us to write your novel. We're working on our first business fable, so it's technically a fictional story, but it's a business book. And we'll see how that goes. Those books are harder to write, I think. But memoir, self-help, personal development, any sort of nonfiction book would be our speed. We focus specifically on what I call big idea books. And my definition of that is any book or idea that challenges the assumptions of a particular audience. A big idea challenges the assumptions of your audience. So to begin, all you need is a big idea, and we hold your hand through that process. But my challenge to any client, this is a takeaway for anybody listening, is if you've got an idea for a book, make that idea as strong and as interesting as possible, because people forget or ignore good ideas. It's not enough to have a good idea. You need an interesting idea, and an interesting idea is any idea that challenges your audience's assumptions. So a little formula that we use is everybody thinks X about a particular topic. Let's say you wanted to write about cryptocurrency. Everybody thinks crypto is Bitcoin or whatever, right? Everybody thinks X, right? So that's the first part of the formula in order to have a big idea. But what's actually true is Y. That's the second half. So everybody thinks that cryptocurrency is, I don't know, about computers and technology. But the fact is, it's more about humanity than it is about money, whatever. But you would pick a subject, right? Something that you want to talk about or write about. And then you would make a long list of all the things that people assume are true about that particular topic. And then you would challenge it. You would pick one that you're going to challenge. That's not true. So Real Artists Don't Starve, the last book that I wrote, I wanted to write a book about how to make a living as a creative professional. And I made a long list of things that most people believed about them. And it was like, well, what do most people believe? Oh, that you're going to starve. What has every musician, artist, writer heard since they were a kid? You better have a backup plan. You can't do that. You'll starve. And so I took that, head on. I go, no, real artists don't starve. And that was my argument. And now I needed to prove it. So we challenge our clients to be thinking about their big idea, and then we hold their hand through that process. But that's a good way to start. How would you fill in the blanks? Everybody thinks X about your particular topic, but what's actually true is Y, and you're going to challenge that assumption.
Cool. So there are formulas that help the customer and you to decide and to, it's a journey. Like it's a process.
It's a journey. Yeah. And I would, and if somebody comes to me and they don't have that big idea yet, we would encourage them to wait. It's okay to wait. The world doesn't need another book just because, you want to put your name on something. You need to be saying something that's never been said before. I don't want to just put more books out into the world. As a reader, I don't want more crap to sort of sift through. And so one of our our only goal is to help authors put better books into the world for the sake of authors. Nobody wants to put another bad book into the world. Nobody wants to be known for writing a bad or mediocre or not that interesting of a book. And certainly for readers, nobody wants to read a boring book. So that's our mission, is to, no more boring books. There are now 10 times the amount of books being published every year as there were just a decade ago. So there's a tremendous amount of books because of self-publishing that are now out in the world. And, it's our mission to make those books better than they would otherwise be. And that begins not with better writing, but with a more interesting idea.
Super. I think that's the tagline on your website as well, right? Stop being boring.
Stop being boring. Yeah. It's not that hard.
It's not easy either. I mean,
It's not simple. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that say something that has never been said before. How easy is that?
How easy is it?
Yeah.
It's not as hard as people think. Um,
Is it
and
another assumption?
Yeah, I
That's
think
tough.
I think it's a question of conversation. So when you're working on a book, I recommend that you don't tell everybody that you're working on a book. Don't even tell people necessarily what the book is about, but have conversations with friends and colleagues and people that you respect, and just kind of like float ideas by them. But don't tell them, "Hey, I'm writing a book. Tell me what you think about this idea." That's too much pressure, and people will lie to you, or they'll sugarcoat things, or they'll give you unhelpful advice. But if I go, "Hey, George, I'm working on a book about, I don't know, this, we'll use the crypto thing, right? We're working on a book about the state of cryptocurrency." Or I would say, I wouldn't say that. I would say, "Hey, man, what do you think about this?" I'm kind of wrestling with this idea. I think everybody thinks that crypto is about technology when really it's about humanity. And then you might go, "Oh, that's interesting." Or, "No, I don't think that's true. I think blah, 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 blah." And what you're really looking for is you're looking for resonance. So how hard is it to know that you have an interesting idea? It's not hard, but you got to get the ingredients right. And there's two sort of ingredients to that recipe. One is you've got to get people to agree with the assumption, right? So that's part one of the formula. Everybody thinks X. I've got to be able to go, "Hey, George, everybody thinks cryptocurrency is about technology. Don't you agree with that?" And you go, "Oh, yeah, totally." Okay, good. Now I've satisfied the first part of the formula. And now the second part is I'm going to challenge that assumption. You don't have to agree with that part, but you have to find it interesting. Meaning I go, everybody thinks that it's about technology when really it's more about humanity and our control over our assets or whatever. And you go, "Oh, yeah, I never really thought about it like that." If we're having a conversation about an idea and I get to have that conversation over and over and over again, people aren't agreeing with me, but they're talking about it, I'm on to something. If they go, "Oh, okay, whatever, that sounds interesting," and you can tell they don't get it, you don't have it yet. And so I think authors rush into writing a book where they haven't clearly thought through the big idea. And it just, you can do that, but it makes the writing harder. The writing becomes much easier when you've got something that's visceral, that people are going to vehemently disagree with, or they're going to be on board with it, right? So big ideas like the 4-hour work week, that title in itself immediately challenges people's assumptions about how much they should be, working on a weekly basis. And, on and on it goes. I mean, we could talk about big ideas for a whole hour in itself, but that's how you have enough conversations with enough people where they don't know that you're talking about your book. They just think you're talking about an idea, and they're interested.
I see. What do you believe about ownership and copyright?
I don't know. I was thinking about that this morning when I was going for a walk, because the concept of copyright is a new one. Traditionally, ideas were not owned. Stories could
New
not be.
one?
Sorry.
Oh, you mean a new one? You mean relative to how long the humanity has been around, right?
Right. Copyright law started in what, like the 1850s or something, right? It's a new
Mhm.
invention. Um, and what I think is interesting is it's almost impossible to enforce, you know? Um, And there's all these lawsuits around songs, that this melody is too close to that one, therefore this artist has to pay that artist a bunch of money. There is a part of me, the artist in me, actually thinks it's a bad way of sort of litigating and policing creative work, because the fact of the matter is, who knows where an idea comes from? Did it come from another person? Did it come from the collective unconscious? Do we know? That's hard. And for most of humanity, people have not owned ideas or stories. And for most of humanity, artists have been taken care of by their societies, right? They've had patrons. Go back, pre-Renaissance, pre-medieval times. You don't have rich people, rich benefactors paying for creative work. You have the community supporting the artist, going, this is an important piece of our culture, like a shaman or a priest. What this storyteller, sage, artist, what they're bringing to our culture, it's sacred. It's important. We want to protect it. But the work itself does belong to the people. It doesn't belong to the artist. So part of me believes that I don't own my ideas, that the best thing that could happen to my ideas and my words and my stories is that people would steal them, right? And then there's the entrepreneurial part of me that goes, hey, I need to make a buck. I need to take care of myself, this fearful part of me. So I think my job is to make a lot of work and put it out into the world and find a way to generate value from that work without being too picky about who might steal my ideas and not give me credit for it. It's not a thing that I'm particularly interested in. I would never say it's okay to steal somebody else's idea or somebody else's work. But like, you could Google most of my books and find free PDFs online of them. So that doesn't bother me. I don't care about a lot of people having free access to my ideas. There's that old quote by Stuart Brand, who said, information wants to be free. It's always going to find a way to be free. What I don't think is good is if some individual or corporation or entity takes the work of an individual creator and starts generating massive amounts of value off of that, when the artist or creator themselves, they're struggling to, feed themselves. So I think it's complicated. I don't know that I
It
answered
is.
the question. I do think all the blockchain stuff is super interesting. And I think all ideas kind of want to be free. And art never belongs to a single person. It belongs to all of humanity or to nobody.
Makes sense. But you mentioned a couple of things that are, because copyright doesn't cover, for example, ideas.
Right.
It covers the expression of them,
Correct.
of the ideas, the
Right.
tangible form. So it's different, to steal an idea you have, because I'm going to express it in a different way that you would.
Totally.
So it doesn't make any sense, anyways. But to steal a book and sell it as my own or as a publisher or something, it's a different thing.
It is.
And I believe that maybe technology is about to solve that in making like ownership by default something, or in the Web3 environment that we are getting into. But as you mentioned, is a pretty complicated space.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm fascinated by it. And, I make a living off of ideas. And you're right, it's impossible to steal an idea, because it's like, oh, I had that idea. Well, so what? Who's to say? I have had ideas for books that I've sat on and haven't told anybody about it. And then 2 years later, that book gets published. I'm like, that was my idea, And so it's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing to do something with it. And I don't know how it'll all shake out with Web3, and I don't totally understand everything that's happening. But I do think NFTs, that NFTs and books and artwork, and it'll be interesting. What'll be interesting is you'll know who the first person was to generate that expression. Like, we don't even know we misquote people all the time. We think Abraham Lincoln said this thing that he never said. And I do think that'll be interesting. And I do think there is something at an unconscious level that we all know, and humanity keeps sort of returning to itself, and we do that through stories, myth making, ideas, and even with copyright laws, you don't own a book or a song or a movie or a story forever. It eventually belongs to the people. And so I do think there is something at like an anthropological level that we understand we need art. We collectively need art. And we also need to support the artists who are bringing that to humanity. And we need to, more than paying the artists, we need to protect um, ourselves and each other from large entities that want to take one person's ideas or expression of idea and profit off of it at sort of the detriment of everybody else. I think that's what's interesting. And I think what, Web3 is sort of making possible, insofar as I understand it, which is um, we'll know who did it first, and will be protected from the likes of very large organizations that might want to bully smaller groups of people, and they'll be protected, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
Mhm. Do you follow the trends on creator economy, and what do you believe of the current status of it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's so much that I don't know. I have friends who are much more heavily invested in the NFT space. I watch it, and I've mentioned crypto a couple of times, just because that's been interesting to me, and have invested in that, and made good money off of it. And I remember in 2013, I was in a mastermind, and one of the guys in our group came to the group one day, and he's like talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and we thought he was crazy. And 9 years later, I'm like, dude, I'm so sorry. And this dude retired. He's fine. Um, but creator economy, yeah, sort of. I'm getting old, and I think we keep coming up with new words for old things, right? The creator economy is just, artists finding a new way to put work out into the world using digital technology. And what I think the creator economy is it's the same thing that blogging was, 10 years ago, which is um, creating stuff that markets itself, right? That is actually what I think we're talking about is um, all art has an aspect of marketing to it, whether people realize it or not. You don't make a piece of art and stick it in a safe somewhere. You make a piece of art and put it on the wall, right? It has a way of bringing attention to itself. Pablo Picasso's first work was he painted a menu at a cafe in Barcelona, and he did it for free because he understood that if people see my work in a public place, they'll come find me and they'll come hire me. So I think in part, what the creator economy is it's an acknowledgement that lots of people are artists, and there's lots of ways to make art in the world and benefit from that, benefit other people, and make a living off of it. That's interesting. But it's the same thing that Jim Henson was doing with his puppets, doing coffee commercials, back in the 1950s and 60s, is he was
Mhm.
finding a way to do funny, interesting, creative work that was personally fulfilling and satisfying to him until it wasn't, and he had to go do something else and getting paid to do it, right? That's no different than like a YouTuber monetizing their YouTube channel with ads, right? Or selling merchandise or whatever. It's like, I've got your attention, I'm doing the thing that I want to do, and now I've got to connect it to commerce in some way. And I think that's interesting. But I also think it's not a new thing, it's a new expression of a very old thing. You go back to the Renaissance and artists were doing that.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of the aspects are old stories, but yeah, we keep adding new jargon on top of it to make it more interesting,
Yeah,
more marketing,
yeah. Nothing.
marketing wise. Yeah.
There's a historian, guy named Will Durant, who said nothing is new except arrangement. And so, we've heard, like there's nothing new under the sun, but it's like we're always rearranging, we're remixing, that old YouTube video, everything is a remix. We're rearranging the stuff that we've always had in new and interesting ways. And I think the conversation that art and money has, that they have with each other, it's a timeless conversation. Art doesn't live over here and money lives over there. They're always dancing with each other.
Mhm.
And that's a timeless dance, I think. And the creator economy is a new expression of that, where you don't have to go to a bank, to get a loan to go start your art business or whatever, and you don't have to sell out to some corporate entity or sponsor to make stuff that you believe in and make a living off of it. And so I just think it's a way for you to take more control of that dance that creative people have always had to figure out.
Do you believe people will keep reading books?
I don't know. I mean, the short answer is yeah, but I think that's the wrong question. I think the question is, will human beings keep finding ways to make meaning out of their existence? And of course they will. It's like the thing that human beings can't stop doing is we keep finding ways to make meaning. And we will use symbols to do that, because that's what a symbol does. A symbol is a proxy for meaning, right? It means something, right? So words are symbols. Pictures are symbols. They point to something. There's a great old quote about art. It says art should never say look at me. It should always say look at this, right? Good art never says look at me. It says look at this. Good design, same thing. It's not self-referential. So, you know, uh, a book is a technology, and the book as we understand it right now is about 500 years old. Since the Gutenberg press, books have kind of looked a certain way. That was, we could start mass producing. But before that, you had scrolls, codexes, which were collections of, pieces of paper basically that people wrote on. And at most, you're talking 2,000, 2,500 years. That's a piece of technology. But for all of humanity, for as far as we can tell, we've told stories and we've drawn pictures and we've created symbols as a way of trying to understand our own existence, right? Learning from the past, connecting to your place in the cosmos. So I think we will always do that. How we will do that, how we will express that meaning making, I think it'll evolve. I mean, if we ever get to a point where we're communicating through our minds without words, which is probably uh, an inevitability,
Mhm.
we may not need books anymore, and that's okay. But I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to continue to um, have books as a way of recording the past, understanding our present, and making meaning out of the human experience. But maybe not forever.
Mhm. So it's about the content. It's not about the
Yeah,
medium that carries
it's
the
a
content, right?
technology. It's like saying, will we always have the internet? Probably not, but will we always have information? The internet is just a way to communicate information. Of course we will. Of course we'll. We are um, informational, mechanisms. DNA is information. It's stored in our cells. So human beings are made of information, and as a result, they're always going to find ways. I think, so insofar as we understand right now, always going to find ways to communicate that information with each other. How will we do that? Well, we'll just have to see.
Do you follow the metaverse and all those things happening in that area?
I'm aware of it. I'm not really following it.
Mhm. In terms of creativity, do you see books coming into that place, into that new existence, or is it something that will exist in a different way, like you share, like you said, communicating through minds, or maybe audiobooks, for example, are books, right?
Of course.
And yeah, and movies sometimes are books. I mean,
Yeah, there's that. I'm throwing out these random quotes, but I'm reminded of that old Henry Ford quote. If I gave people what they wanted, I would have built a faster horse. I think that's how we think of technology sometimes. We go, oh, we've got the metaverse. So, like, how will books play into that? And again, I think that might not be quite the right question. It's hard to conceive, like, 19 I'm trying to, like, pre-internet, because I mean they were sort of experimenting with the internet, like, post World War II. um and I'm trying to think, like, 200 years ago, before we had computers, nobody could have predicted a computer. Like, they couldn't have said, gonna go from an abacus to this. I mean, maybe somebody could have. I certainly couldn't have. And I think that's what we're talking about in the next 150 years in terms of what technology will do for information. No average person could have imagined the internet. Now we can't live without it. And I think, a book is a really interesting piece of technology because it's so old that it's probably going to stick around for a long time. Things that have been around for a long time tend to stick around for a long time and not just get immediately replaced. It is more likely that we will replace the internet before we will replace a book. All that to say, I do think that technology is making the transference of information more interesting. And a book typically has been that. So, think about the metaverse. It's like, you might not write a book or read a book, but you might, like, be a book. You might live a book. You may have some way of experiencing a story instead of reading it or watching it or listening to it. And that sounds pretty cool.
yeah, that would be very interesting.
I know, like, 40, I'm almost 40 years old. So when I was a kid, so 30 years ago, I read these choose your own adventure books, and that was fun. It was sort of like what if a book were a video game? And now it's like, what if you were really in it and experiencing it as if it were happening, and your options were not limited, like, it wasn't turn to this page or turn to that or choose between this outcome or that outcome, but you're not playing a video game. You're not experiencing somebody else's reality. You're creating it for yourself. You're writing a book that you get to participate in it as if you were one of the characters, and you are.
That would be
That
great.
seems like inevitable to me.
Yeah, my fear, quote, is that, because the new generation has no, we have a reference from the past. We know books. We know
Yeah.
how it was
Right.
without the internet. The
Right.
new generations are getting, are growing into a space where books don't exist almost. So
Right.
I'm not sure they're going to look for them, in the future, because as something that is missing from the present.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we still have books. People still read. And I don't care. Like, I don't think a book is a sacred thing. I think it's a way to communicate information. And if we can effectively replace the function of books with technology, which a book is technology, with other technology, I think that's great. I think we're in a transition period, so it's hard to tell. Like, I grew up, without the internet. You know what it was like before there was an internet, right? My kids don't know that, right? And I don't think that's necessarily dangerous. I just think it's interesting, and it's going to present its own set of challenges. And it's, I mean, we've experienced this before as a species where we've lost most of the relics of our culture. There's that book, how the Irish saved civilization, about how a bunch of Irish monks preserved a lot of ancient manuscripts from Western culture after the Roman Empire fell. There was a bunch of monks who were just writing this stuff down and keeping it in abbeys and churches. That's cool. I think that's an important function of civilization. What we're seeing with the internet right now that, I don't know, makes me sad, kind of annoys me, is like everybody's living for kind of the fast input block. They're going to listen to a podcast instead of read a book. They're going to watch a video instead of a movie or a documentary. They're going to scroll social media instead of reading a newspaper. And we are, I think, losing our capacity for depth, right? I don't listen to podcasts. I think podcasts are fine. I participate in them. But if I can listen to a book, like an audio book, or listen to even a 2 or 3 hour interview, I'll choose the book because it's a deeper, more immersive experience. Now, I think podcast interviews and things can be incredible sources of inspiration, but you want to go deep in a subject, read something that somebody spent 3 years writing and somebody spent, 6 months editing. I think what is missing in this transitional period in humanity is a deep experience of content, of information. And I think people will get tired. I think they're already getting tired of the fast paced nature of Web 2.0, right? Of the social web. It's just bam, 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 bam. You got to keep up with, this incessant feed. Human beings don't want that. They do want depth. They do want meaning, and they will only tolerate surface level stuff for so long. Ricky Gervais said this thing that I thought was really interesting a while ago. He's a famous atheist. He is famed for his atheism, and he loves science. And somebody said, he said, if you got rid of all of the religious texts in the world, 1,000 years from now, we wouldn't replicate them, wouldn't recreate the Bible, wouldn't, recreate the Quran or any of these ancient texts. Somebody wrote them and we revere them, but you couldn't reproduce them. They're not observable in nature, is what he was saying. Contrast that with all of the rules of science. Get rid of all of our books about science. 1,000 years now, even 100 years from now, we'll relearn these same things because that's how science works. That was his argument. That's a great argument. I don't agree with it. I think that if you got rid of all of the religious texts, all of the mystical literature, all of the philosophical works, all of the questions that humanity have had about life and itself, all of the information that we have about why we're here and what this is all about, you get rid of all of those. Would we have the Bible with the book of Leviticus? Well, probably not. But you would have some version of everything that we have right now that helps us make meaning of our own existence. I believe in myths. I believe in stories. I believe in this deeper way of understanding the world. And you see it happening even now. You saw it happen with the pandemic. What did people do? They started returning to nature. They started returning to creativity. They started returning to self-sufficiency. I'm not going back to the office. I'm going to stay here. I'm going to make my own way. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to cook sourdough bread, whatever. My point is,
So true.
I believe in humanity, and we keep finding our own way back home. And we're going to keep managing our edges, and we're going to use technology to help us connect with these deeper questions. It is impossible to predict where we'll be 100 years or even 50 years from now, because it was impossible to predict this. And yet I'm optimistic about the whole thing. But I do think it's easy for old guys like us to watch all these kids, looking at their screens, or us looking at, our own screens, and go, oh my gosh, what is the world going to be like, 30 years from now? And who knows? But I think 300 years from now, whatever maladies we've created will in many cases be corrected, and we'll be dealing with, our own set of challenges. But I'm a fan. It doesn't mean that humanity doesn't have their own periods of, dark ages, and what follows the dark ages is the Enlightenment, right? And so humanity keeps doing this, and I think it's fascinating. I'm not scared.
Cool. Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. Before we wrap this up, what's next for Jeff? What plans do you have?
Well, in spite of the fact that, who knows what's going to happen with books, I'm going to write another book. I haven't written a book for 5 years. 2020 was a challenging year for me, as it was for a lot of people. I went through a divorce, personal reinvention, handful of
Well,
existential crises, and it's been a while, and so I write books first for myself and then for other people. And I have a thing that I want to say, at least to myself, and if somebody else wants to listen in on it, that would be great.
what is
So
it going to be about?
I want to write a book about the self, about how your job here on earth is to not be a success or become famous. I tried those things, they work okay. It's for you to actually know and understand yourself, to run your own race, to go your own way. Most of my life, I thought there was a way to get it right, and there isn't one way to get it right, but there's one way to get it wrong, which is to try to walk somebody else's path. And I've experienced tremendous freedom and joy as a result of going, I don't have to be George. George has to be George. I got to be Jeff. I got to be me. And I will spend my whole life trying to figure that out. And yeah, I mean, this past season, a lot of things in my life burned down. And I realized no matter what, I'm always stuck with me. So I better figure that out.
Sounds like a very, very interesting book. So
Well,
let's see when it comes about. And thank you again for your time, for being here at Torocon. And see you soon.
thank you. My pleasure.